Belinda Johnson was rooted to the spot in the doorway of the Whitaker mansion, her eyes wide as she watched three 6-year-old boys transform the elegant living room into a chaotic battlefield. Paint was splattered across the pristine white walls, expensive furniture lay overturned, and feathers from ravaged pillows danced in the air like a bizarre snowstorm. But it wasn't just the sheer destruction that stunned her. It was the unmistakable pain etched in the boys' eyes. "You can't make us like you," Tommy, the eldest triplet, yelled, flinging a toy truck at her feet. "We don't want another nanny. We want our mama." His brothers, Danny and Bobby, stood behind him like miniature soldiers ready for war, their little faces stained with streaks of tears and dirt. They had successfully driven away 17 nannies in the past 6 months, and they were clearly determined to make Belinda number 18. But as Belinda gazed at these heartbroken children, she didn't see monsters. Instead, she saw 3 little boys who were drowning in grief and terror, desperately trying to shield themselves from being hurt again. "I know you miss your mama," Belinda said softly, carefully stepping over the wreckage of broken toys scattered across the floor. "And I'm not here to replace her. I'm here because I think you need someone who understands what it feels like when your world falls apart." The boys stopped throwing things, taken aback by her gentle words. No nanny had ever spoken to them like this before. Tommy stared at her with suspicious eyes. "You don't know anything about us." Belinda knelt down so that she was at their eye level. "You're right. I don't know everything about you yet, but I know that you're scared. I know that you're angry. And I know that you think if you're mean enough to me, I'll leave just like all the others did." The 3 boys exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this kind of response. "But here's the thing," Belinda continued, a small, reassuring smile gracing her lips. "I'm not going anywhere, and by the end of today, I'm going to show you something that will change everything." Tommy's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What?" Belinda stood up, brushing feathers off her dress. "I'm going to show you that it's okay to let someone new care about you, even when your heart is broken." Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway, and the boys' faces went pale with fear. "He's coming," Danny whispered, his voice trembling. "Daddy's going to be so mad about the mess." But what happened next would shock everyone in that house, including the man who had spent the last 6 months believing his sons were beyond reach. 6 months earlier, John Whitaker sat in his corner office on the 45th floor of Whitaker Industries, staring at his phone as it rang for the 3rd time that morning. He knew it was either his assistant with yet another nanny crisis or the boys' school with another incident report. He was right on both counts. "Mr. Whitaker," his assistant, Rebecca, said when he finally answered, "I have bad news and worse news." John rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar throbbing of a headache starting. "Give me the bad news first." The school called. The boys started a food fight in the cafeteria, locked their teacher in the supply closet, and refused to come out of the playground tunnel when it was time for class. John sighed deeply, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. "And the worst news? Nanny number 17 just quit," Mrs. Patterson said, and I quote, "Those children are possessed by demons, and no amount of money is worth risking my sanity." John felt like his world was slowly crumbling around him. 6 months ago, he had been a successful businessman with a beautiful wife and 3 happy children. Now, Sarah was gone, killed in a tragic car accident that had shattered their family. And John was drowning, struggling to be both father and mother to 3 heartbroken boys who seemed determined to destroy everything in their path. "Rebecca, call the nanny agency. Tell them we need someone immediately." "Sir, I already did. They said they're out of candidates. Word has gotten around about the boys, and no one wants to work for the Whitaker family anymore." John stared out his office window at the sprawling city below. He was worth over $2 billion, but all his money couldn't solve the most important problem in his life. His sons were falling apart, and he had absolutely no idea how to put them back together. At 35, John had built an empire from nothing. He was brilliant, determined, and had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve. But grief had transformed his boys into unrecognizable strangers, and John felt utterly helpless watching them spiral into a vortex of anger and destruction. The truth was, John was struggling with his own grief. Sarah had been his best friend, his partner, and the very heart of their family. Without her, John felt completely lost and overwhelmed. He worked longer hours because it was far easier than facing the empty house and his son's accusing eyes. The boys blamed him for their mother's death, even though they never said it out loud. Sarah had been driving to pick up a surprise gift for John's birthday when the accident happened. The guilt was eating John alive, and he knew his sons felt it, too. "Sir," Rebecca's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. "What should I do about finding a new nanny?" John paused for a moment, considering his options. "Post an ad online. Offer double the usual salary. Someone out there must be desperate enough to work with my sons." Little did John know that the person who would answer his ad would change all their lives forever. 30-year-old Belinda Johnson sat in her tiny apartment, scrolling through job listings on her laptop while the relentless rain drummed against her window. She had been out of work for 2 months, ever since the family she had been working for had relocated to another country. Belinda had been a nanny for 8 years, and she genuinely loved working with children. But lately, the job market had been incredibly competitive, and families seemed to prefer younger nannies with fancy degrees and glowing references. What families didn't see in Belinda's resume was her unique and invaluable gift. She understood pain. Belinda had grown up in the foster care system after her parents tragically died in a house fire when she was only 7 years old. She had been passed from home to home, never staying anywhere long enough to feel truly safe or loved. By the time she aged out of the system at 18, Belinda had learned to recognize the subtle signs of a child in emotional pain. She had also learned that sometimes the children who acted the worst were often the ones who needed love the most. When Belinda saw John Whitaker's job posting, she almost scrolled right past it. The description was intimidating, to say the least. Seeking experienced nanny for 3 energetic boys. Previous nannies have found the position challenging. Competitive salary for the right candidate. But something in the carefully chosen words made Belinda pause. Previous nannies have found the position challenging. That was clearly rich people speak for. Our kids are completely out of control, and we're desperate. Belinda did some research on the Whitaker family and found the news story that changed everything. 6 months earlier, Sarah Whitaker had tragically died in a car accident, leaving behind her grieving husband and 6-year-old triplets. Belinda's heart ached as she read the news articles. She knew exactly what those boys were going through because she had experienced it herself. The overwhelming fear, the burning anger, the desperate need to push people away before they could leave you, too. "Those boys don't need a nanny," Belinda said to herself with newfound determination. "They need someone who understands." She spent the rest of the night crafting an application that was unlike any resume she had ever sent before. John sat in his home office the next morning, dreading the interviews he had scheduled. The house was unusually quiet because the boys were at school, but John knew that the peace wouldn't last for long. Rebecca had arranged meetings with 5 potential nannies, and John wasn't optimistic about any of them. Most people took one look at his son's reputation and ran in the opposite direction. The first candidate arrived promptly at 9 o'clock. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who had worked for several wealthy families. "Mr. Whitaker," she said crisply, "I understand your children have behavioral issues. I believe in strict discipline and firm boundaries. I've never met a child I couldn't control." John felt immediately uncomfortable. His sons didn't need to be controlled. They needed to be healed. The second candidate was a young woman fresh out of college who seemed bright and enthusiastic. But John could tell she had absolutely no idea what she was getting into. "I just love children," she gushed. "I'm sure once the boys see how fun I am, they'll forget all about being sad." John thanked her politely and moved on to the next interview. The third and fourth candidates were similar, either too strict or too naive to handle 3 traumatized children. Then Belinda arrived. John opened the front door to find a woman in her 30s with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. She was wearing a simple but professional dress, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm Belinda Johnson. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." As they walked to his office, John noticed that Belinda wasn't looking around the mansion with the wide-eyed amazement that most people showed. She seemed more interested in the family photos on the walls than the expensive artwork. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Johnson," John said as they sat down. Belinda took a deep breath. "Mr. Whitaker, I don't have a college degree in child development. I don't have certificates in early childhood education. What I do have is 8 years of experience working with children and a childhood that taught me what it feels like when your world falls apart." John was surprised by her honesty. "What do you mean? My parents died when I was 7. I spent the rest of my childhood in foster care, moving from family to family. I know what it's like to be scared that everyone you care about will leave you. I know what it's like to push people away because it hurts less than being abandoned. Belinda leaned forward slightly. Mr. Whitaker, I've read about your family's loss, and my heart breaks for what you and your sons are going through. Your boys aren't bad children. They're grieving children. And grief in children often looks like anger and defiance. John felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. The previous nannies all said my sons were impossible to manage. That's because they were trying to manage them instead of trying to understand them, Belinda said gently. Your sons aren't trying to be difficult, Mr. Whitaker. They're trying to survive. For the first time since Sarah's death, John felt like someone truly understood what his family was going through. Miss Johnson, I have to warn you. My sons have driven away 17 nannies in 6 months. They can be destructive. Belinda smiled. Mr. Whitaker, I've worked with children who set their foster homes on fire because they were afraid of being hurt again. I've worked with kids who broke everything they touched because they felt broken inside. Destruction is just pain with nowhere else to go. John stared at this remarkable woman who seemed to see his sons as human beings instead of problems to be solved. When can you start? He asked. The next morning, Belinda arrived at the Whitaker mansion at 7 o'clock, carrying a thermos of coffee and a bag of homemade cookies. She knew that first impressions mattered, especially with children who had been hurt. John met her at the door, looking exhausted and stressed. The boys are still asleep, but they'll be up soon. Are you sure you're ready for this? Belinda handed him the thermos. Thought you might need some coffee. And Mr. Whitaker, I want you to know that whatever happens today, I'm not giving up on your sons. John was touched by the simple gesture. When was the last time someone had thought to bring him coffee? Thank you, Miss Johnson. That's very kind. Please, call me Belinda. At exactly 7:30, the sound of running feet echoed through the house, followed by shouting and the crash of something breaking. They're up, John said with a grimace. Belinda followed the noise to the kitchen, where she found 3 identical boys with dark hair and bright blue eyes engaged in what looked like a full-blown syrup war. The kitchen island was covered in a sticky mess, and one of the boys was standing on a chair, preparing to dump an entire bottle of orange juice on his brothers. Food fight, yelled one of the boys when he saw Belinda in the doorway. Instead of getting angry or trying to stop them, Belinda did something completely unexpected. She laughed. Wow, she said, walking calmly into the chaos. You guys are really good at making messes. I'm impressed. The boys stopped mid-fight, clearly confused by her reaction. You're not going to yell at us? Asked one of them. Why would I yell? This looks like it was actually pretty fun, though. I bet you're all sticky now. The boys exchanged glances, clearly thrown off by Belinda's calm response. I'm Belinda, she continued, sitting down at the kitchen table as if sticky floors and food-covered children were perfectly normal. And I brought cookies, but I guess you're probably too full from eating all that syrup to want any. We weren't eating it, one boy said defensively. We were throwing it. Ah, I see. Much more fun than eating it, I bet. What are your names? The oldest boy, who seemed to be the leader, crossed his arms suspiciously. I'm Tommy. That's Danny. And that's Bobby. And we don't like nannies. That's okay, Belinda said cheerfully. I'm not really a nanny anyway. What are you then? Danny asked, curious despite himself. I'm a friend who happens to know how to make really good cookies and tell awesome bedtime stories. Bobby, the youngest, perked up. What kind of stories? All kinds. Stories about brave knights, magical animals, and kids who go on amazing adventures. The boys were clearly interested, but Tommy wasn't ready to let his guard down. We don't want friends, he said firmly. Friends leave. Belinda's heart ached at the raw pain in his voice. You're right, Tommy. Sometimes friends do leave. Sometimes people we love leave, even when they don't want to. The boys went quiet, and Belinda could see tears forming in their eyes. But you know what I learned? Belinda continued gently. Just because someone leaves doesn't mean they didn't love you, and it doesn't mean that everyone else will leave, too. Our mama left, Bobby whispered, his voice breaking. I know, sweetheart. And I bet that hurts so much that sometimes you feel like your chest is going to break open. All 3 boys nodded, tears now flowing freely. Can I tell you a secret? Belinda asked softly. They nodded again. I lost my mama and daddy when I was just a little older than you, and for a long time, I was so angry and scared that I tried to push everyone away. I thought if I was mean enough, People would leave before I could get attached to them. The boys stared at her with wide eyes. Did it work? Tommy asked quietly. For a while, but I was so lonely, and I missed out on knowing some really wonderful people because I was too scared to let them care about me. Belinda reached into her bag and pulled out the cookies. These are chocolate chip. They were my mama's favorite. I make them when I miss her. She placed the bag on the table. You don't have to eat them if you don't want to. And you don't have to like me if you don't want to. But I'm going to be here every day whether you're good or bad, happy or sad. Because that's what people who care about you do. They stick around. The kitchen was silent except for the sound of the boys sniffling. Then Bobby, the youngest, took a tentative step toward the table. Can I try a cookie? He asked shyly. Of course, sweetheart. Bobby took a bite, and his eyes lit up. It's really good. Danny and Tommy exchanged glances, and slowly they, too, approached the table. As the three boys ate cookies and began to relax around Belinda, John watched from the doorway in amazement. In 20 minutes, this woman had accomplished what 17 previous nannies couldn't do in months. She had reached his sons. But John had no idea that their peaceful morning was about to be shattered by news that would threaten to tear their fragile new beginning apart. John's phone rang just as the boys were finishing their cookies, and his face went pale when he saw the caller ID. It was his lawyer, Marcus, and he only called when there was serious trouble. John, we have a problem, Marcus said without any greeting. Channel 6 News is running a story tonight about your family. Someone leaked information about the nannies quitting, and they're painting you as a negligent father who can't control his children. John felt his stomach drop. What exactly are they saying? The headline is, Billionaires' Demon Children Drive Away 17 Nannies. Are the Whitaker triplets out of control? They have interviews with 3 former nannies who are calling the boys dangerous and emotionally disturbed. Through the kitchen doorway, John could see Belinda sitting with his sons, all of them laughing as Bobby told her a silly joke. For the first time in months, his children looked genuinely happy and peaceful. Marcus, can we stop this story from airing? I'm trying, but it's going to be difficult. John, there's something else. They specifically mentioned that you just hired a new nanny yesterday. They're probably going to target her next. John's blood ran cold. If the media destroyed Belinda's reputation like they had destroyed his family's privacy, she might leave just like all the others, and his sons would be heartbroken all over again. I have to warn her, John said, ending the call. But when John walked back into the kitchen, he found a scene that made him stop in his tracks. Belinda was sitting on the floor with all 3 boys, and they were building something together with blocks. The boys were actually cooperating, taking turns, and helping each other. Look, Daddy, Bobby called out excitedly. We're building a castle for Mama. Belinda says Mama can see us from heaven, so we want to make something beautiful for her. John felt tears welling up in his eyes. His sons hadn't mentioned their mother in a positive way since she died. They had been too angry and hurt to remember the good times. It's beautiful, boys, John said, his voice thick with emotion. But then Tommy looked up at his father with worried eyes. Daddy, you look sad. Is Belinda going to leave like all the others? John looked at Belinda, who was watching him with concern. He knew he had to tell her about the news story, but he was terrified that she would run away to protect herself. Boys, Belinda said gently, why don't you keep working on the castle while I talk to your dad for a minute? John and Belinda stepped into the living room, and John took a deep breath. Belinda, there's something I need to tell you. The local news is running a story tonight about my family. They're going to make my sons look like monsters, and they'll probably come after you next. Belinda listened quietly as John explained about the media attention and the damage it could do to her reputation. I understand if you want to leave, John said sadly. I won't blame you for protecting yourself, but I want you to know that in one day you've done more for my boys than anyone has been able to do in 6 months. Belinda was quiet for a long moment, lost in thought. Mr. Whitaker, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you believe your sons are monsters? John was shocked by the question. Of course not. They're grieving children who miss their mother. Then why does it matter what strangers on TV say about them? John stared at her, searching for the right words. Because it will affect their futures, their school, their friendships, their opportunities. Belinda said gently. It will show them that the people who really love them will stand by them no matter what the world says. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden where Sarah used to play with the boys. Mr. Whitaker, I've been judged my whole life. Foster kid, no parents, No fancy education. People looked at me and decided I wasn't worth much. But a few people saw past all that and believed in me anyway. Those are the people who changed my life. Belinda turned back to John. Your sons need to know that they're worth fighting for. If I run away the first time things get difficult, what does that teach them about their own worth? John felt his heart swell with admiration for this incredible woman. So you're staying? I'm staying, but I have one condition. Anything. When that news story airs tonight, we watch it together as a family, all of us, and we talk about it honestly. John nodded, though he was worried about how the boys would react to seeing themselves portrayed as problem children on television. The rest of the day was magical in a way the Whitaker house hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Belinda seemed to have an intuitive understanding of what each boy needed. When Danny had a meltdown because he couldn't find his favorite toy, Belinda didn't try to distract him or tell him to stop crying. Instead, she sat with him and let him cry, gently rubbing his back and telling him it was okay to feel frustrated. When Bobby got scared during their afternoon walk because a loud truck reminded him of the accident that killed his mother, Belinda picked him up and held him close while he trembled, singing softly until he felt safe again. And when Tommy tested her by deliberately spilling paint on her dress, Belinda just smiled and said, "Looks like we're both artists now. Should we paint something together?" By evening, the boys were following Belinda around like devoted puppies. They helped her make dinner, set the table, and even cleaned up their toys without being asked. John watched in amazement as his sons transformed before his eyes. They were still the same children, but the anger and fear that had consumed them for months were beginning to fade. "Belinda," Tommy said as they finished dinner, "will you read us a bedtime story tonight?" "Of course, sweetheart. What kind of story would you like?" "A story about a mama who goes to heaven but still loves her little boys," Bobby said quietly. Belinda's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "I know the perfect story for that." At 8 o'clock, the whole family gathered in the living room to watch the news. John held his breath as the story began. Tonight at 8, billionaire John Whitaker's out-of-control children have driven away 17 nannies in just 6 months. Former employees described the Whitaker triplets as dangerous, emotionally disturbed, and impossible to manage. We'll speak with 3 former nannies who say working for the Whitaker family was a nightmare. The boys watched in confusion as their pictures appeared on screen with words like problem children and behavioral issues flashing across the screen. The bottom. "Daddy," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why are they saying such mean things about us?" The first former nanny then materialized on the screen. "Those children are completely out of control," she declared with disdain. "They destroyed property, they refused to follow any rules, and they seem to derive pleasure from making adults absolutely miserable. I have never encountered such difficult children in all my life." Tommy's face just crumpled, his lower lip trembling. "Are we really that bad, Daddy?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Before John could even formulate an answer, Belinda stepped in. "Boys, do you know what I see when I look at you?" she asked, her voice gentle and reassuring. The triplets all shook their heads in unison, their eyes wide with anticipation. "I see 3 incredibly brave little boys who love their mama so much that they're willing to take on the entire world to protect her memory," Belinda said, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "I see children who are smart enough to test the new people in their lives to make absolutely sure that they are safe to trust. And," she continued, her voice full of affection, "I see kids who possess big, beautiful hearts that are just waiting for the right person to help them heal." On the television, the second nanny was now speaking, her tone cold and judgmental. "The father is never around, so these children have absolutely no discipline or structure in their lives," she stated flatly. "They need professional help, not just another nanny to come and go." John felt his anger begin to surge, but Belinda remained remarkably calm and composed. "That lady doesn't know what she's talking about," Bobby said, his voice filled with indignation. "Daddy loves us more than anything." "You're absolutely right, sweetie," Belinda agreed, her voice soft and comforting. "Your daddy loves you all so much that he's been working extra hard, day in and day out, to take care of you all by himself. And that's not easy, my loves, especially when your heart is broken, too." The third nanny then appeared on the screen, and her words were, without a doubt, the cruelest of all. "Those children are damaged beyond all repair," she said, her voice devoid of any empathy. No amount of love or patience will ever fix what's wrong with them. The Whitaker family needs to face the harsh reality that these boys may never be normal. Tommy immediately burst into tears, his body shaking with sobs. "She thinks we're broken forever, Daddy," he cried, his voice laced with despair. Belinda wasted no time in moving to the couch, pulling all three boys into her arms in a warm, comforting embrace. "Listen to me, my sweet boys," she said, her voice filled with unwavering conviction. "That woman is completely and utterly wrong. You are not broken. You are not damaged. You are hurting, yes, but that's completely different." She looked each boy deeply in the eyes as she spoke, her gaze filled with love and understanding. "Grief isn't something that needs to be fixed," she explained gently. "It's something that needs to be honored. You're not supposed to be normal right now. You're supposed to miss your mama and feel sad and scared. That's how love works, my darlings." "But the lady said no one can help us," Danny sobbed, his small body trembling in Belinda's arms. "Well, that lady never met me," Belinda said with a warm, reassuring smile. "And she certainly never met three boys as special and as strong as you." John watched in complete awe and amazement as Belinda turned what could have been an absolutely devastating moment into a beautiful opportunity for healing and growth. The next morning, John's phone was ringing nonstop, the insistent buzzing a constant reminder of the turmoil that had engulfed their lives. The news story had gone completely viral, spreading like wildfire across the internet, and public opinion was now sharply divided between those who felt genuine sympathy and sorrow for the boys and those who were quick to judge them as spoiled brats who desperately needed discipline. John's business partners were calling, their voices filled with worry and concern about how all the negative publicity would inevitably affect their companies and their bottom lines. The boys' school even called to schedule an urgent meeting to discuss addressing the behavioral concerns that had been so publicly raised in the media. But without a doubt, the worst call of all came from Child Protective Services. "Mr. Whitaker," the voice on the other end of the line said sternly, "we've received several complaints regarding your children following last night's news story. We need to schedule a home visit as soon as possible to properly assess the situation." John felt as though his entire world was once again crumbling around him, the weight of despair threatening to suffocate him. If CPS decided that his sons were indeed out of control, they could easily recommend removing them from his home and placing them in foster care. When he finally hung up the phone, his hands shaking, he found Belinda in the kitchen, happily making breakfast with the boys. They were all wearing colorful aprons and giggling as they playfully flipped pancakes. "Bad news?" Belinda asked gently, instantly noticing the look of utter despair on his face. "CPS wants to do a home visit," he said, his voice laced with anxiety. "People are actually calling my sons dangerous based on a completely one-sided news story that's filled with distortions and exaggerations." The boys immediately stopped laughing, their faces falling as they looked up at their father with fear in their eyes. "Are they going to take us away, Daddy?" Bobby asked in a tiny, trembling voice. John immediately knelt down and pulled his sons close, wrapping his arms tightly around them in a protective embrace. "I will never, ever let anyone take you away from me," he said, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. "Never." But privately, deep down, John was absolutely terrified. What if the social worker actually believed the media's biased and sensationalized narrative? What if they decided that the boys would be better off in foster care, away from him? "Mr. Whitaker," Belinda said quietly, her voice filled with reassurance. "May I make a suggestion, please?" "Of course, Belinda," he replied, grateful for her calm presence. "What if we invited the social worker to spend an entire day with us?" she suggested. "Not just a quick, hour-long visit, but a real, genuine day where they can truly see what your boys are actually like, how kind and loving they are." "Do you think that would work?" he asked, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. Belinda smiled warmly. "I think that anyone who spends any real time with Tommy, Danny, and Bobby will undoubtedly see what I see," she said with conviction. "Three absolutely amazing kids who just need a little bit of love and a lot of patience." 3 days later, Mrs. Rodriguez from Child Protective Services arrived promptly for her scheduled visit. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who clearly expected to find a scene of complete chaos and dysfunction. Instead, she found three well-behaved boys happily helping Belinda make cookies for their father's office staff. "Good morning, Mrs. Rodriguez," Belinda said warmly, extending her hand in greeting. "The boys are absolutely thrilled to show you their usual morning routine." Mrs. Rodriguez looked skeptical as she watched Tommy carefully measure out flour while his brothers eagerly took turns stirring the batter in the bowl. "We're making cookies for Daddy's workers," Bobby explained proudly. "Belinda taught us that when people work really hard, they deserve something sweet as a thank you, and we're going to personally deliver them ourselves." Danny added enthusiastically, "We want to say thank you to them for helping Daddy build his buildings." Mrs. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, her expression conveying her disbelief. These were the very same children who had been described as completely uncontrollable on the news. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Belinda said gently, her voice filled with understanding, "would you be interested in hearing the boys' side of the story?" For the next hour, Belinda skillfully guided the boys in explaining their feelings about their mother's tragic death, their deep-seated fear of new people entering their lives only to eventually leave them, and their utter confusion about why so many nannies had simply given up on them. "We weren't trying to be bad," Tommy said earnestly, his eyes filled with sincerity. "We were just scared that if we let ourselves like someone, they would go away just like Mama did." "But Belinda taught us that it's perfectly okay to be sad and scared," Danny added, his voice soft but clear. "She doesn't try to make us forget Mama. She helps us remember all the good and wonderful things about her." Mrs. Rodriguez spent the entire day with the family, carefully observing their interactions, their daily routines, and their genuine affection and love for one another. At dinner, she watched John patiently help Bobby cut his food while attentively listening to Danny's lively story about his day at school. She saw Belinda gently teach Tommy how to fold napkins while they casually talked about his worries and his hopes and dreams for the future. "Mr. Whitaker," Mrs. Rodriguez said sincerely before leaving, "I've been doing this job for 20 years now, and I've rarely seen a family working so diligently to heal together. Your boys aren't simply problems to be solved. They're children who are bravely learning to trust again, one step at a time." She then looked at Belinda with genuine respect and admiration. "Miss Johnson, whatever you're doing, please keep doing it," she said. "These children are incredibly lucky to have you in their lives." 6 months later, the Whitaker family had undergone a complete and remarkable transformation. The boys were all thriving in school, had made many new friends, and rarely exhibited any of their previous behavioral issues. More importantly, they had learned to talk openly about their mother with genuine love and fond memories instead of just pain and heartache. John had also changed significantly. He had finally learned to strike a healthy balance between his work and his family, and he had discovered that being fully present for his sons was far more important and rewarding than any business deal could ever be. But perhaps the biggest change of all was just how deeply John had come to love and depend on Belinda. She wasn't simply a nanny anymore. She was, without a doubt, the very heart and soul of their family. One evening, after the boys were fast asleep, John found Belinda in the garden, the very same garden where Sarah used to play with the children. "Belinda," he said softly, sitting down beside her on the bench, "I need to tell you something that's been on my mind for a long time." "What is it, John?" she asked, her voice gentle and full of concern. "When Sarah died, I honestly thought my family was broken forever," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought my sons would never be happy again, and I was convinced that I would never feel whole again either." Belinda listened quietly, her hand gently finding his and offering him comfort. "But you didn't just save my boys, Belinda," John continued, his voice filled with gratitude. "You saved me, too. You taught me how to be a better father, a better man, and a better person all around." John then got down on one knee, his heart pounding in his chest, and pulled out a small ring box. "Belinda Johnson, I love you more than words can possibly express," he said, his eyes shining with love. "My sons love you dearly, and I honestly can't imagine our lives without you." Belinda gasped, tears streaming down her face as she listened to his heartfelt words. "Will you marry me, Belinda?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. "Will you officially become a permanent part of our family?" "Yes," Belinda cried, throwing her arms around John's neck in a joyous embrace. Yes, yes, yes. The wedding was held in the very same garden where John had proposed, with Tommy, Danny, and Bobby proudly serving as the ring bearers. They had all insisted on wearing matching tuxedos and had spent weeks meticulously practicing their walk down the aisle. During the beautiful ceremony, John and Belinda exchanged vows that they had each written specifically for their own unique family situation. "Belinda," John said, his voice filled with love and emotion, "you didn't just agree to marry me. You also agreed to love 3 broken-hearted little boys and help them become whole again. You are truly the answer to prayers I didn't even know how to pray." "John," Belinda replied, her voice equally emotional, "you and the boys taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. You chose to trust me with your most precious treasures, and I wholeheartedly choose to love and protect all of you for the rest of my life." But the most touching and heartwarming moment of all came when the boys stepped forward with their own special vows for Belinda. "Belinda," Tommy said, speaking for all 3 of them, "we promise to always be good boys for you. We promise to always remember that Mama loved us very much, and that you love us just as much, too. And we promise to help you take care of Daddy, because sometimes he forgets to eat lunch." Everyone in the garden was crying and laughing at the very same time, their hearts filled with joy and gratitude. 2 years later, John and Belinda happily welcomed a beautiful daughter into the world, whom they named Lily. The boys were completely over the moon about their new baby sister and took their roles as big brothers incredibly seriously. "She's so tiny and precious," Bobby marveled, gently touching Lily's delicate hand. "We have to protect her and teach her absolutely everything," Danny declared with determination. "Just like Belinda protected and taught us," Tommy added wisely. 5 years after Belinda first walked into the Whittaker mansion, the family was completely unrecognizable from the broken, grieving people they had once been. The boys, now 11 years old, were all honor students who were well known at school for their kindness, empathy, and compassion. They often went out of their way to help younger children who were struggling, using the emotional wisdom that Belinda had so patiently taught them. John had expanded his business to include a foundation that provided much-needed support for single parents and grieving families. He had finally learned that his greatest success wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the unwavering love and stability he provided for his family. Belinda had started a successful consulting business, helping other families who were struggling with loss, grief, and behavioral challenges. She had also written a book about healing from grief and raising children that had quickly become a national bestseller. And little Lily was growing up surrounded by more love than any child could possibly ask for, with 3 doting big brothers who absolutely adored her and parents who had learned firsthand that the strongest families are often the ones that have been broken and lovingly rebuilt with love and compassion. On the anniversary of Sarah's death each year, the entire family would visit her grave together. But instead of being a sad and somber occasion, it had become a heartwarming celebration of how love continues to thrive and endure even after loss. "Mama," the boys would say, "we want you to meet Belinda and Lily. We think you would have really liked them a lot. And Daddy smiles again now, so you don't have to worry about us anymore." The media that had once portrayed the Whittaker triplets as demon children now held them up as a shining example of resilience, healing, and the transformative power of love. But John and Belinda didn't really care about public opinion anymore. They had learned that the only opinions that truly mattered were the ones that came from the people who genuinely knew and loved their family. As Belinda tucked the boys into bed one night, Tommy looked up at her with the same look of trust and affection that had taken months to develop. "Belinda," he said softly, "I'm so glad you didn't give up on us like all the other nannies did." "I could never give up on you, sweetheart," Belinda replied, gently stroking his hair. "You 3 taught me what I was really meant to do with my life." "What's that?" he asked curiously. "Love you all forever," she replied with a warm smile. And that's exactly what she did. The story of the Billionaire's impossible triplets had become a beautiful and inspiring story of how broken hearts can heal when they're given patience, understanding, and unconditional love. Belinda hadn't just survived working with the Whittaker boys. She had given them back their childhood, their father back his purpose, and herself a family that was truly worth fighting for. Sometimes, the most difficult children are simply the ones who need love and compassion the most. And sometimes, the people who seem the least qualified on paper are actually the very people who can work absolute miracles with their hearts. If you enjoyed this emotional tale, please like, share, and subscribe for more.